Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the broadcast. It's Monday, September 24th, 2018. I'm Sean, your host. The website is scriptureandprophecy.com. And we are approaching, depending on what calendar you look at, we are approaching the final fall feast, the Feast of Sukkot. It's also called the Feast of Tabernacles or the Feast of Booths. It's this idea of dwelling with God, and it's one of those feasts that we will be commanded to keep even in the millennial kingdom. And we are currently working through the prophetic book of Zechariah. And if you go to the last chapter, I believe, or chapter 14, I could be wrong. I'm quoting that off the top of my head. It talks about how if you do not come up during the Feast of Tabernacles to worship, that your country will not receive rain and things of that nature. So it's a very, very interesting feast, a very, very interesting appointed time or celebration. And, it's a kind of a rehearsal or a memorializing, more of a rehearsal, I guess, of an event that is to come. And it's also memorializes, I think, the time when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness and they were dwelling in tents for 40 years, booths. And so rather than go into all the details again, I thought I would just rebroadcast the teaching from last year. And so that's what I'm going to do right now is play that teaching for you real quick. Again, depending on what calendar you look at, if you go by the calendar at Root Awakening, the Feast of Sukkot, Feast of Tabernacles really starts at sundown September 25th, so tomorrow at sundown, and runs through September 26th. But again, different calendars, different ideas on this. At least that's the high Sabbath, apparently. But I'm not really here to argue about the dates or anything like that. The whole point is just so you have an understanding of what it's all about. So I'm going to rebroadcast that for you here in just a minute. And just a reminder, the website, scriptureandprophecy.com, that's where you go to support this mission, this radio program. It's completely listener supported. We don't sell products or DVDs or anything like that. So if you want to support it, you can do that. Scriptureandprophecy.com. You can become a Patreon subscriber monthly, or you can just do one-time donations through PayPal, or you can send mail to the post office box that's listed on the website. All right, that's enough rambling. Let's get to the broadcast. And this, like I said, this is a rebroadcast of this teaching about the Feast of Sukkot from last year. Peace and grace be with all of you. And until next time, God bless. Shalom, shalom, and welcome back to Scripture and Prophecy. I'm your host, Sean, and the website, www.scriptureandprophecy.com, is where you can go to find the archives. It's also where you go to find a prayer wall. You've got a prayer request, or if you're a prayer warrior and you want to pray for other people and their needs, you can find that prayer wall right there on the right-hand side. There's also some forums and just some ways for you to interact and share some ideas. That's also where you go to support this mission of truth and support me and my family and all of that. Today is Thursday, October 5th, 2017, and tonight at sundown begins the Feast of Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. And of course, this all depends on what calendar you go by. Some calendars may state that it started last night at sundown. But I don't get too worked up or get into debates about these dates as far as, was it yesterday, was it today? According to A Root Awakening, which is the site that I use for the calendar, it starts at sundown tonight, October 5th, and runs through October 13th. And today is just going to be a short podcast about the Feast of Sukkot, because if you don't know what it is, And or if you're like me and you're kind of new to celebrating the feast and everything, you kind of want to have an idea of what's going on. So I'm going to read to you from this site what it is, and then we'll look at some scripture and some stuff like that. So, and I'll leave a link in the description if you're watching it on YouTube to the What is Sukkot page at arootawakening.com, and that way you can go and look at this for yourself. But here's what Sukkot is in a nutshell. Sukkot is also called the Feast of Tabernacles, or Feast of Booths. Sukkot is one of 3 pilgrim feasts, or feasts for which we are commanded to go up to Jerusalem. Today there is no temple to go to in Jerusalem, but we still celebrate the feast because it is a rehearsal of events that have already occurred and some yet to come. The first day of Sukkot and the last 8th day are high Sabbath, special Sabbaths, other than weekly Sabbath, Saturday. Personally, have taken a day of no work. The first day, which would be really starting tonight and then through tomorrow, would be considered the first day. So I personally have taken off work for Friday, and then it ends on the 13th, which I believe is next Friday. I'll have to look at my calendar, but those are the 2 high days. Actually, just let me pull it up on my phone there. Those are the 2 high holy days where you're told to do no servile work, which basically, again, just means your everyday job. Yeah, so Friday the 13th, and I just happen to have that day requested off as well. So that's kind of how I do it. I use some vacation time when at all possible. That's what I've done this year, just to observe, the do no servile work. Don't do what brings you. That doesn't mean you can't do other things around the house or whatever. Just the no servile work. All right, let me keep going here. In 2017, Sukkot is from sundown, October 5th, through sundown, October 13th. The 1st and the 8th days are high holy days, as referenced on the astronomically and agriculturally corrected biblical Hebrew calendar. During the Feast of Sukkot, we remember when the Almighty led the Israelites out of Egypt, and they lived in shelters in the wilderness for 40 years. During this time, the Almighty also dwelt in a sukkah, the singular form of the Hebrew word Sukkot, among the people. He tabernacled among us. For Sukkot, each family is commanded to build a temporary shelter, a sukkah, and dwell in it for the length of the 8-day feast. Some people set up a tent to dwell in during this time, while others build more elaborate yet temporary structures with PVC pipe, bamboo, or wooden boards. It can be as simple as a square or rectangle top and 4 legs. The walls of the sukkah are usually some kind of fabric. Most people eat their meals in the sukkah, and some even camp out in it each night. The sukkah is intended to remind us of our need for the Almighty's provision and of the fact that our life on earth is temporary, just like the sukkah itself. And so what I'm personally going to do, hopefully it's not raining tonight, is I'm just going to set up our tent out in the backyard and we'll eat some meals in there, might camp out a night or two. But yeah, it's a reminder, it's a reminder of when the Israelites were brought out of Egypt, and, they spent that first night in huts, temporary structures, and it wasn't much, but they were finally free. And then, of course, what this article points out is, there's also the tabernacling among us by the Almighty Himself. And then, of course, when Jesus came, He tabernacled amongst us while He was here. One of the questions on the site is, has Sukkot been fulfilled? And the answer is, Sukkot has been intermediately fulfilled. That is, it has been fulfilled in a physical sense, the Messiah's birth and earthly ministry. So, when Jesus was tabernacling among us, dwelling among us. But the spiritual sense, His return has yet to come. Physically speaking, The Feast of Sukkot commemorates when over 2,000 years ago, on the first day of Sukkot, a high Sabbath, the Messiah was born. He was the very Word of the Almighty made flesh, and literally dwelt or tabernacled with us. In a spiritual sense, the Feast of Sukkot is all about finally dwelling with the Almighty after the end times. When we are gathered to Messiah, there will be a great feast during the Feast of Sukkot. The Bible likens it to a wedding feast and calls it the marriage supper of the Lamb. You can check that out in Revelation chapter 19, verse 6. The groom is the Messiah, and we are like a bride that is waiting for him. Then, on the last great day, the 8th day of the feast, Yeshua returns to the earth on white horse to rule with his people for 1,000 years. In the final fulfillment of this feast, there will be a new heaven and a new earth, and we will finally dwell with the Almighty forever, the eternal Sukkot. So you see, there's a lot more to Sukkot than people realize. People kind of treat this one as a, whatever type of holiday, but it's extremely important, and it points us to when Christ is going to come back and dwell with us for 1,000 years. And during that time, my friends, and I'll show you the scripture here in a minute, but during that time, while Messiah is here reigning for 1,000 years with a rod of iron, he is demanding that the nations come up to Jerusalem to celebrate this feast every year. And if they do not come to celebrate the Feast of Sukkot, then there'll be no rain in their land. Or if it's Egypt who refuses to come up to tabernacle, they'll have the actual plagues. So that's prophesied by the prophet Zechariah, that will be the expectation. So this is a very important holiday. The Feast of Sukkot, this 8-day I wish I was more prepared. I wish I had more vacation time and more money, because I just would have did like an 8-day camping trip with my family, but it just wasn't something that could happen today. So it's backyard this year. But we just have to look. We can't go to Jerusalem and go to the temple and celebrate this, right? So we just have to commemorate it the best way we can. And for me personally, that means setting up a tent out in the backyard and trying to eat some meals in there, maybe do some Bible studies in there, as a reminder that that structure is temporary, just like my life, but also as a reminder that Messiah is coming back and will tabernacle amongst us, and we will be celebrating this feast under his instruction. And I'm looking forward to that. All right, Leviticus chapter 23, verses 39 through 43. So I'm going to read you a handful of verses here. This is, Leviticus 23 is all about the feast, by the way. So if you ever want to know more about whatever feast, just go to Leviticus 23. It's a great place to start. Here's what it says. Also, in the 15th day of the 7th month, when you have gathered in the fruit of the land, you shall keep a feast unto the Lord 7 days. And on the first day shall be a Sabbath, and on the 8th day shall be a Sabbath. And ye shall take you on the first day the boughs of goodly trees, branches of palm trees, and the boughs of thick trees, and willows of the brook. And ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God 7 days. And ye shall keep it a feast unto the Lord 7 days in the year. It shall be a statute forever in your generations. By the way, how long is it to be a statute? It says forever. And then ask yourself, what does forever mean? Ye shall celebrate it in the 7th month. Ye shall dwell in booths for 7 days. All of the Israelites born shall dwell in booths. By the way, if you are a believer in Messiah, then you are grafted into the tree, meaning you are part of Israel. There is no longer Jew or Gentile when in Messiah. Verse 43, that your generations may know that I made, here's the reason Daddy wants you to celebrate it, that your generations may know that I made the children of Israel to dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am Jehovah your Elohim. And so that's what it has to say, It's an 8-day thing. You're to not work on the first day or the 8th day. And it's a feast unto the Lord. And and it should be a statute in your generations forever, and it's to be celebrated in the 7th month, which is what we're in if you're looking at the Hebrew calendar, not your Gregorian, Roman, Babylonian calendars. All right, let me show you what Zechariah has to say, and then that'll be the end of the podcast here. Zechariah, if you go to chapter 14, we have verses 16 through 21, so a handful of verses. Here's what he has to say, talking about the future. And it shall come to pass that every one that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the feast of the tabernacle. Did you catch that? That everyone that is left of all the nations which came against Jerusalem. So this is, after that whole thing, which is in the future. When all the nations have come against Israel and they've been defeated by the Messiah, it shall come to pass that everyone that is left of all those nations which came against Jerusalem shall even go up from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, and to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. And it shall be that whoso will not come up from all the families of the earth to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, even upon them shall be no rain. And if the family of Egypt go not up and come up that have no rain, there shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite the heathen that come not up to keep the Feast of the Tabernacles. You see, when Messiah's here, he's going to rule with a rod of iron, folks. This will not be optional. You either obey the Lord and come celebrate the feast and tabernacle with him, or you're going to have rain and some other problems. Verse 19, this shall be the punishment of Egypt, and the punishment of all nations that keep not the Feast of the Tabernacles. In that day shall there be upon the bells of the horse holiness unto the Lord, and the pots in the Lord's house shall be like the bowls before the altar. Yea, every pot in Jerusalem and in Judah shall be holiness unto them, unto the Lord of hosts, and all they that sacrifice shall come and take of them and seeth therein. And in that day there shall be no more the Canaanite in the house of the Lord of hosts. That's exciting stuff to think about. All the nations coming up to Jerusalem to worship the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Lord of hosts, and tabernacle with him. Hopefully that gives you an idea of what Sukkot is all about from a Christian perspective. And hopefully that makes some things clearer to you. I pray that it has blessed you this morning. I'll be back with you tomorrow, Lord willing, with our prophecy podcast. And I've got a lot to say, we'll put it that way. We're going to talk about all these dates that people have been throwing around and some of the things going on in our country. And should be a good podcast, one that you're going to want to tune in for. That's all I got for you this morning. Peace and grace be with all of you. And until next time, God bless.